Right now, inside the Democratic Party, there's a conversation happening beneath the surface about power, about direction, and about what comes next that most people really aren't fully seeing. My guest today is Holly Otterbein, one of the best-sourced reporters covering that story at Axios. She's not just watching it unfold, she's talking to the people shaping it. So today, we're going behind the headlines to understand what's really happening inside the Democratic politics right now. Holly, thanks for being with me. I really want to dive right in here. You're reporting about the Democratic Party at a time when it is really, they're having a real identity tension, if you will. Would you tell me what about the party specifically is not being reported at this time or not being reported enough that we could understand better?
That's a really great question. What is being reported not enough? I mean, this is a very selfish answer. I'm just going to go for it. I feel like the 2028 presidential race, which is my beat, is not being covered enough throughout the rest of the media. We at Axios, have the privilege of being able to report on it. We have a newsletter that we do every week. But I think just given that the potential candidates who are thinking about running for president on the Democratic side in 2028 are really already out there. I mean, like the pre-primary has started earlier than ever. They're all traveling to the early states. They're going to New Hampshire and Iowa and South Carolina, places that have traditionally voted early in the primaries. They're meeting with donors. They're ramping up their media schedule. They're going on every podcast known to man. Just given that the primary has really, in a way, the invisible primary at least, has really begun, I think that it's pretty undercovered, given that.
There's so much other news that's competing for time.
There is. And in the Trump era, Democrats always get, Democratic coverage, I should say. They get a little bit of short shrift, right? We saw this the first time around. And I think that'll change a little bit as the year goes on, and especially as the midterm cycle starts to really ramp up. And then once that ends, I think you'll see what happened in, 2018, 2019, where you ended up seeing, much more coverage of Democrats then. But Trump does, suck up a lot of oxygen.
Is there an opportunity in that, though? Like, does this give these early candidates, the candidates that are in the field right now, an opportunity to sort of test and see what gets traction? Do you see that as maybe working to their advantage, at least in these early days?
Yeah, I think it does. I think that they don't have to worry about being covered with as much scrutiny, right? As they would be otherwise, partly because of Trump, partly because the race is so early, because it's so early in the cycle. And so they're able to experiment, test out different policy ideas. You've got folks like Rahm Emanuel, the former Chicago mayor, like rolling out a policy platform every other day. You've got people who are testing out different messages. They're all going on these different podcasts. And yeah, I think just kind of giving, their platforms, a test run.
You do a lot of really great reporting, and we're going to get into all of that because I think everyone that is interested in what's going to happen in 2028 should be following right now. There's a lot of really cool stuff in this newsletter, so we're going to unpack that a little bit. I want to talk to you because the campaign in general is a bit of a sell to those that are covering the industry, those who are covering the races, about why their candidate is the very best candidate. How do you sort through that noise and identify what's real and what's spin, for lack of a better word?
I like to think that it's just kind of a muscle that has been, worked out over, I've been in journalism now for, 17 some years. You just kind of start to have an ear for the spin, and sometimes spin has some truth to it, right? Like sometimes there's a little bit to it, so you can't be so cynical that you don't, listen for it. But we try in our newsletter to, cover all of the candidates as fairly as possible. We try to get a mix in there. It's so early that, it's a pretty wide open field. There are front runners, definitely, but it's not a settled field, and there's no gigantic names in it the way that there was in, presidential races, for instance, in 2008 or, in 2020 or 2016, right? There's no Hillary Clinton or Joe Biden. There's Kamala Harris, but obviously she just lost. So, that's a little bit different. And so, what we try to do is tell the stories that other people aren't telling, that maybe other people are afraid to tell, it's the stories that everyone kind of may know, are happening, but like they're just not writing about it, perhaps because they are too afraid to, or it's too sensitive. We're not afraid to go there and explore those things. And we try to also go there in person. We try to hit the ground as much as we can and see these candidates live as well.
The party itself, and this is, I'm asking you specifically about the Democrats because that's specifically who you cover. So I'm not picking on one side or the other because I think both sides have a very similar trouble in that they are incredibly fractured because there's a lot of different factions in the various parties. But I'm curious specifically about the Democratic Party because you cover it so closely, about those different factions. I asked a friend not long ago who spent quite a bit of time on the Hill as a Democratic communications director, who she saw as a leader in the space. And she said, it depends on what corner of the party you're asking about. So I'm curious to you, how do you see them in the party that in terms of the candidates so far that are emerging? Are they separated generationally? Are they separated ideologically? Where are you seeing those fault lines and those splits? Is there issues that are breaking folks apart? Tell me a little bit about what you're seeing in the early days.
Yeah, I mean, the way that you put it is exactly right. There are so many different divisions, and it's not just progressive versus moderate, which is, a split that we've seen for decades now, right? But especially, I'd say, in the last 10 years. On top of that, now you've got a real generational divide as well. That's kind of new. That was really exacerbated after, former President Joe Biden dealt with some, aging issues in office and then, tried to run for re-election, just couldn't. We all saw what happened at the debate and then dropped out. And that just created an immense amount of anger, I think, from younger Democrats and just a desire to, basically move things along, that they had been sort of, more comfortable with waiting for their turn. They suddenly were uncomfortable with it. They saw what the consequences of that were when it was taken to the extreme, right? And so that's a new divide, and we're seeing it, play out in a number of congressional primaries this year in the midterm races. Take the main Senate Democratic primary right now, to jump, from 2028 to 2026, because 2026 is going to tell us a lot about where the Democratic Party goes in 28, right? It's gonna give us a lot of clues. And so, the main Senate primary is a perfect example of something that is divided on multiple fault lines. You've got the progressive versus moderate. Graham Plattner, Oysterman, he's the progressive. He's endorsed by Bernie Sanders. You've got Janet Mills, the incumbent governor. She is endorsed by Chuck Schumer. Okay, so it's by ideology. It's also by age. Graham Plattner is in his 40s. Janet Mills is older. You've also, you've got it by gender. He's obviously a man. She's a woman. Gender issues have come up. He, said in past social media posts some things that many people thought were offensive about rape, for instance. Janet Mills has made this a campaign issue. And so, we're seeing just an immense amount of divides in the party, just along so many different fault lines that I haven't seen quite before. We're also seeing Israel is a huge fault line right now, perhaps the biggest one. Folks in the party who are pro-Israel, folks in the party who are pro-Palestinian. That is coming up again in these congressional primaries and in the presidential primary, pre-primary, as I like to call it, as well. Mm-hmm. And when people ask me, when is this all going to be resolved? I like to say, not until 2028, at the very least, right? Yep. Yep. Until there's a nominee, this is going to be a live war. And even that, that is true regardless of what happens in the 2026 midterm elections, right? I think that obviously there's a few different ways that the the elections could turn out and you could have it be a great day for progressives, a great day for moderates. You could also have it kind of be a wash, which is sort of what we saw in the 2025 elections when you had, Zoran Mamdani, a Democratic Socialist, win in New York, but you also had more moderate figures like Abigail Spanberger and Mikey Sherrill win the governor's races in New Jersey and Virginia. And that kind of result, I think, almost furthers the divide because then everyone's got like their talking points, right? They're able to say like, we won in X place. And so
I love to say that maybe it's the generalization of the world. Media gets blamed for it, but it's true everywhere. You can't define a party by one candidate or another, and even regionally. I mean, everywhere they're so very different. So it's tidy to talk about it, all the Democrats and all the Republicans. But the truth of it is that there are so many fault lines and so many different corners of it.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a coalitional group, right? Always. And so there's going to be divides. But I think the Democratic Party feels particularly divided right now because they're still sorting through 2024, right? And why they think they lost and how they think they can win back power.
Any Republican who tells you that they're not divided is wrong.
Oh, they most certainly are. I mean, you see that. I mean, look, just listen to Tucker Carlson for 2 minutes, right?
Right on.
Absolutely. No doubt about that. We're just focused on the Dems because that's my beat.
That's exactly right. It's interesting on both sides, but I think both sides are facing very similar identity troubles and worries. You're watching a lot of candidates, though. You talk about 26, you talk about 28. There's a lot to watch. Who's standing out as maybe one that is underestimated or underreported that we should be watching more closely?
Okay, I've got an answer for you that I don't know if this is maybe counterintuitive. I would say Kamala Harris is a potential 2028 candidate who is underestimated. A lot of DC Democrats kind of want to bury their heads in the sand and pretend that she's not keeping the door open to a White House run in 2028, but she clearly is. She's acknowledged that publicly. She's doing all of the things. She's traveling to the South. She's visiting state Democratic parties. She's continuing her book tour. She's doing media interviews. And she has, I think, a kind of hidden strength or a strength that is not totally appreciated, which is that she is leading by a large margin among Black Democratic voters in the primary polls that we see in 2028. That's an incredibly critical voting bloc that has been extremely influential in basically all of the recent presidential primaries on the Democratic side. And I think as long as that's true, she is underestimated. I mean, people will talk about Gavin Newsom being the front runner. He is a front runner. When you look at the 2028 primary polls, it's Newsom and Harris right next to each other. But, for whatever reason, I think I would argue that it's because a lot of party leaders, party operatives just want to pretend that she's not running. She's not talked about as much in that way.
That's interesting. If you were advising candidates and not reporting on them, what would you tell them to stop doing right now?
Ooh, I'm gonna totally dodge that question because I don't think journalists should play operative.
Fair enough.
I love that you went there though. I love that question. I'll tell you off the record later.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
The reason why I ask that question is always because I'm curious about what is working and what is not working when it comes to identifying stories, identifying the tactics that work to get your attention. So let me flip that on its head and ask you it that way. What kinds of tactics do you think are smartly being deployed at this point in the campaign, whether it's 26 or 28?
I think Newsom obviously has shown that he understands this attention economy, right? And he might be one of the only, potential 2028ers on the Democratic side that really seems to get it. Whether it's, through those tweets, which like you can roll your eyes at them or whatever, where he, basically mimics the Trump style on, social media, it gets attention. So did doing his redistricting gambit in California, which I think, that basically shot his pre-primary presidential campaign into space because, that came at a time when Democrats just felt extremely disempowered, just extremely depressed. And I think a lot of the voters in the party still to this day feel like Democratic elected officials aren't doing enough. And he seized on that. And, there's basically, no one like him, so far who has shown command of the attention economy in a way that I think is just reflective of the media dynamics of today. He's always in the news, and he is able to, not always control the narrative, but just is able to push forward what he wants to a lot of the time. And, there's an interesting debate, I think, going on in the party. I was talking with, a liberal leader, and, they were arguing that in 2028, we're going to see basically like, when you're evaluating electability, should you look at who is able to understand the attention economy, like a Gavin Newsom, or should you look at kind of more traditional metrics like who can win a swing state, right? Like a Josh Shapiro or a Raphael Warnock or a Nandi Bashir. And so that's an interesting, I think, like question that primary voters will have to answer.
And if you look at the way that the current president and the current mayor of New York City ran their races, those are also very prevalent and active tactics that they deployed successfully. So it'll be 100%. It'll be interesting to see if the governor has seized on something that is sustainable. What's a story right now that you really want to write but haven't had a chance to get to yet?
Ooh, that's a great question. I'd love to dig in more into AI in campaigns. I've written a little bit about it. I did a story, a week or so ago with my colleague Alex Eisenstadt, who covers Republicans, and he found that Republicans were really starting to experiment with AI a lot in campaigns and were just willing to kind of do anything, even if that meant, crossing some lines that Democrats would not like to cross. Democrats have been a little bit more hesitant. A good example of this is that the DNC has greenlit for its staff the use of Gemini, the Google AI, but they are not using ChatGPT and Claude. And so, and when you talk to Democrats too, Democratic strategists, Democratic campaign aides, they'll just tell you themselves they feel like Democrats are behind on AI. And so we wrote a little bit about that. But I'd like to just continue to dig into this. I think there's so many different, sort of storylines that are interesting. I mean, the way that operatives are starting to think about how to try to get the answers that they want into the chatbots, right? So that because people are turning to chatbots for everything, as we know, and that includes voting. So, when somebody asks, who should I vote for? Campaigns are starting to think about, how do they get the answers into the chatbots that they want? So that's
fascinating.
So interesting, right? It's kind of like the old school search engine optimization, but for LLMs. Yeah, no doubt. That's definitely it's coming.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then there's the politics of AI. I wrote a little bit about AI data centers and the backlash toward them. One trend, that I thought was super interesting was that a number of potential 2028 candidates on the Dem side, who had really embraced data centers and tried to, lure them to their states through things like pretty lavish tax credits, and other goodies. They pivoted, this year as the backlash against data centers really started to, get hot. And, folks like Josh Shapiro and Wes Moore, and JB Pritzker, they shifted a little bit and they're not anti-data center by any means, but they're just starting to talk about it in a more measured way, talking about, how they understand there's negatives that come with them as well. And kind of let's try to slow down this process. Let's maybe stop some of these tax credits. And so just seeing that shift happen, among both kind of more liberal, Democrats like Pritzker with more moderate Democrats like Shapiro and Moore is super interesting and, something to continue to watch.
I had a conversation with Maddie Mills in an earlier Axios April conversation, and we talked about AI and how AI data centers specifically are the new fracking.
I heard that. Yes, that was so smart.
Super interesting to see, because you're absolutely right. At one point, the data centers was a political advantage, and that has very much turned. It's going to be interesting to see, especially, as you say, for those governors who have had to make those hard decisions on the front lines in the states, as opposed to those who were in the Senate that perhaps didn't have as much proximity to those particular close issues. But it'll be certainly an issue that's going to continue to unfold. I'm curious. You have some remarkable sources. You have, the stories and the work that you're breaking every day is so insightful. And we're going to get to how listeners can find you and follow this new newsletter that you are putting out every week that is so smart. How do you keep your sources? How do you protect your independence at a time when you are spending a lot of time with a lot of different candidates? That's a dance that a lot of journalists have to do. And I'm curious about how you've done that yourself.
Yeah, it is. I think and I love the way that you asked it, right? I think it's just something you have to be conscious of and aware of all of the time and just try to protect against it. I think talking to as many people as possible is something that I've really tried to do and increasingly do as I get older and have been in my career for longer. Don't ever just talk to one side of the party. Don't ever talk to one demographic group in a party. Don't ever talk to one regional group in a party. The more that you talk to a diverse set of sources, just the more fascinating it becomes, and the better of a reporter you are, and you get to guard yourself against some of those biases as well. But what you're talking about is really real, especially as you truly enter the vortex of a presidential campaign. I remember, when I first started covering presidential campaigns, editor advising me just be aware you're going to be sucked into this person's world in such a deep way, and you have to be really careful that you don't start to see the world through their eyes. And I thought that was just a great piece of advice. And talking to your colleagues too, right? They can be just incredibly good at calling BS out, right? Even, from yourself, that maybe you're not hearing yourself say the BS. And then once you talk to a colleague, they can help screen that for you. But it's something I really try to be aware of. It's just incredibly important to be trusted by everyone on all sides.
Absolutely. And you make a great point that I hadn't even thought about, not just the different candidates, but the different corners of the party, as we talked about how fractured and how different they really are as they represent themselves. My last question to you is, if in fast forward 12 months, what story do you think we'll be talking about that no one sees coming today?
That's a great question. 12 months from now. Okay, so this is going to be April. There's going to be a zillion Democrats running. People are probably, unless something dramatic changes, going to not be happy with the economy. Gosh, that is a great question. I'm kind of blanking here. I have to be honest. What is the story that we...
Well, perhaps it's that AI story you talked about earlier.
Yeah, I was going to lean on that, but I didn't know if that was cheating.
No, I don't think it's cheating, because I think what you said earlier, and I heard you say, is that number one, there's the impact that the campaigns will have on the LLMs, but also two, think about how fast AI is moving.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
If you and I talked 6 months ago, our perception of AI and those platforms was dramatically different. And so I feel like the entry of the internet was one sort of fast moving thing. That was nothing compared to what we're seeing today. So in 12 months, you and I may not even know what that issue is, because it will be so much further advanced. So I think that question was a little bit unfair, but I think you might have answered some of that in what you said about the story that you continue to pay attention to.
I think that's right. Look, if AI continues to speed along and is as transformative as, AI leaders say that it's going to be, and potentially as destructive, when it comes to people's jobs, we could see a massive political change. AI executives are talking about a level of job loss that we have never seen in modern times as a possibility. And like, if things like the, free trade deals, led in some way to, the rise of populism today, imagine what like the job loss that would be even greater than what that caused could create in the future. And then if it is a bubble of some kind, and it still has an impact on the economy, that still could have a huge effect, right?
Absolutely.
So yeah, I agree with you. I should have gone with AI from the jump. It was kind of on the tip of my tongue.
I mean, I think I was pulling a thread that I was hearing you say before. I was curious about that. Holly, tell my audience where they can find you and subscribe to the newsletter that you're doing every week.
Yeah, thank you so much for offering. So we write a newsletter called Axios 2028. If you just Google Axios 2028, it'll send you to a place where you can sign up for our newsletter. Comes out every Sunday afternoon. Just a great time to settle down and have a little Sunday read before you have to start work on Monday. And you can also follow me on X at Holly Otterbein. That's me. Thank you so much.
This was a great conversation, Holly. Stay hydrated, my friend. It's going to be a busy season for you, and I look forward to seeing you out on the trail.
Thank you so much for the time. Thank you. This was great.
That was Holly Otterbein. If there's one thing to take from this conversation, it's that the biggest political stories are not yet the loudest ones. They're the ones taking shape quietly in conversations most of us are not yet hearing. And that's exactly why reporting like this matters. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to follow the Friday Reporter, share it with someone who wants to understand what's really driving politics right now, and check out Holly's work at Axios. I'm Lisa Camooso Miller. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.